some objects refuse to sit comfortably in history. Not because they are magical or impossible, but because they don't fit the stories we expect the past to tell. A book written in an unknown script, a statue carved from living rock, a machine built with gears centuries before such devices were supposed to exist. Each of them is real. Each has been studied carefully. And yet each still resists a complete explanation. In this episode, we'll look closely at three ancient mysteries: the Voynich Manuscript, the Great Sphinx of Giza, and the Antikythera Mechanism. Not to solve them, and not to inflate their mystery, but to understand what we actually know, how these objects were discovered, how they were studied, and where the evidence genuinely runs out. Because sometimes the most interesting questions aren't hidden in the unknown. They're hiding in the details we tend to overlook. This is the Moonlight Scholar, a place for quiet stories of science, history, and the mysterious corners in between. I hope you will find rest here, and maybe even learn something. If you fall asleep along the way, you can always return later. There are timestamps in the description below, so you can easily find your way back to the story. If you enjoy this video, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and tap the like button. It helps more people discover these quiet stories, and you might just help another sleepless person drift off a bit easier. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. There's nothing you need to do right now. Nothing you need to remember. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. If your eyes are open, let them rest on a single point. If they're closed, that's fine too. Take a slow breath in through your nose. Then let it out gently without forcing it. Feel the weight of your body where it meets the bed or the chair. The surface beneath you is doing the work of holding you up. As you listen, you don't need to stay alert or focused in any special way. Just let the details arrive one at a time. Dates, places, materials, ideas, each of them can pass through without effort. This is a story told slowly, piece by piece. You don't have to solve anything. You only have to listen. When you're ready, we'll begin. Our first object is the Antikythera Mechanism. Recovered from a Roman shipwreck, it was initially mistaken for a lump of corroded bronze. Only through careful study did it become clear that this was a complex mechanical device, one whose purpose could be examined through gears, ratios, and surviving fragments. In the spring of 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers were working in the Aegean Sea off a small rocky island called Antikythera. Sponge diving at the time was dangerous work. Divers wore heavy suits and descended with little more than air hoses and weighted boots. During one of these dives, a storm forced the crew to shelter near the island. While waiting for the weather to clear, they explored the seabed. That's when one of the divers came back to the surface with a strange report. He said the seafloor was littered with statues, human figures lying in the sand. At first, this sounded impossible. but when the crew went back down, they confirmed it. Scattered across the seabed were bronze and marble statues, pottery and other cargo, all resting at a depth of about 45 meters. What they had found was a shipwreck. Over the following year, Greek authorities organized a recovery effort. It was difficult and often dangerous. Several divers were injured and one died. But they managed to bring up a large collection of objects, statues of gods and athletes, amphorae used for transporting goods, glassware, coins. The ship itself was eventually dated to around the 1st century BC, based on the style of the artifacts and the coins recovered. At this point, there was nothing especially mysterious about the find. Shipwrecks from the ancient Mediterranean were known, and this one fit a familiar pattern. It seemed to be a Roman-era cargo ship, likely transporting luxury goods, artworks taken from Greece and bound for wealthy buyers elsewhere in the Roman world. Among the recovered items, however, were several small lumps of heavily corroded bronze. They didn't look like much. They were roughly fist-sized, cracked, and fused together by corrosion. No one paid them much attention at first. They were catalogued, stored, and largely ignored. That's an important point to pause on. The object we're concerned with here did not announce itself. It wasn't discovered because someone was looking for advanced technology or ancient knowledge or anything of the sort. It was found by accident, mixed in with dozens of other objects and initially treated as unremarkable debris. It wasn't until the artifacts were transferred to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens that something odd was noticed. While the bronze fragments were drying and slowly breaking apart, museum staff saw what looked like gear teeth, small, regular, evenly spaced teeth like those on a cogwheel. This immediately set the fragments apart from the rest of the cargo. Gears were not unknown in the ancient world, but they were rare and usually simple. These fragments suggested something more complex, though no one yet knew how complex. Still, at this stage, the object was little more than a curiosity. The fragments were broken, incomplete, and badly corroded. No one could see how many gears there were, how they fit together, or what the device might have done. For years, progress was slow. The technology needed to look inside the object simply didn't exist yet. So what we have at the start is this: a well-dated shipwreck from the 1st century BC, recovered under difficult conditions, carrying art and everyday cargo, and among it a cluster of corroded bronze fragments that seem to contain gears. That's it. No legend, no ancient text describing it. Just an object pulled from the sea whose significance would only become clear decades later. And this matters, because whatever the Antikythera mechanism turns out to be, it begins its story not as a marvel but as debris, one item among many waiting to be looked at more closely. To understand why the Antikythera fragments mattered, we need to slow down and look at what the object actually consisted of, not what it was later claimed to be, but what was physically there. What survived of the mechanism is broken into several main fragments and dozens of smaller pieces. Together, they amount to roughly a third of the original object. Most of the rest is gone, likely lost to corrosion or still lying on the seabed. The fragments are made primarily of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin that was commonly used in the ancient world for tools, statues, and fittings. At first glance, the fragments look chaotic. They're irregular in shape, cracked, and heavily encrusted. The corrosion was thick enough that early observers couldn't see the internal structure at all. It hid the gears and plates inside, so the object appeared like a lump of metal, not a machine. That is why, for decades, the complexity of the mechanism remained invisible. Once the corrosion is carefully removed, patterns begin to appear. Flat bronze plates, circular outlines, and, most strikingly, gears. A gear, at its simplest, is just a wheel with teeth cut into its edge. When two gears mesh, turning one causes the other to turn. The key detail is that the number of teeth matters. If one gear has twice as many teeth as another, it will turn at half the speed. This makes gears a way to translate motion into predictable ratios. Inside the Antikythera fragments, researchers eventually identified dozens of gear teeth. Some gears are very small, barely 2 centimeters across, with tiny teeth so evenly spaced that even a modern machinist would be impressed. Others are larger, with more widely spaced teeth designed to drive other gears. One gear engages at a slight angle, showing that the designer carefully considered how motion would transfer through the mechanism. Together, the combination of sizes and alignments creates a network capable of translating rotations into precise ratios. This wasn't a loose collection of parts. It was a tightly packed system. The gears were housed inside a rectangular casing, roughly the size of a shoebox. Bronze plates formed the front and back, with space inside for the moving parts. On the outside of those plates were inscriptions, small lines of Greek text, carefully engraved. These inscriptions are easy to overlook, but they're crucial. They aren't decorative. They function more like labels or instructions. They describe cycles, periods, and markers, terms associated with timekeeping and astronomy. In other words, the device didn't just do something. It was meant to be read and used. Because of the heavy corrosion and the way the fragments broke apart, early 20th century researchers misunderstood the object. Some assumed it was a simple counting device or even a decorative piece. Others saw the gears but thought they were random or part of multiple unconnected mechanisms. The full picture, where dozens of gears interact precisely, was not apparent without the imaging technology of later decades. At this point, it helps to clear up a common misunderstanding. Nothing about the materials themselves is surprising. Bronze gears were within the technical capabilities of ancient craftspeople. We know this because simple geared mechanisms existed in water clocks and other devices. What is unusual here is the density and precision of the gearing. Another detail often missed is wear. Some of the gear teeth show signs of use. This wasn't a ceremonial object cast once and never touched. It was meant to be operated, likely by turning a handle or knob connected to the internal gearing. So, when we talk about the Antikythera mechanism as a physical object, we're not talking about a single gear or a clever trick. We're talking about a compact, enclosed system of interlocking parts, designed to move together in a controlled way and accompanied by written guidance on its surface. At this stage, we still don't know what all those moving parts were meant to represent. But we can say something very concrete. This object was built to model relationships that could be expressed through rotation, ratios, and cycles. That observation alone doesn't tell us what the mechanism meant. But it tells us what it was, a carefully constructed device, designed to be turned, read, and understood by someone who knew what they were looking at. And that already places it well outside the category of decorative art or accidental assemblage. By the mid-20th century, the Antikythera fragments had been studied in fits and starts, but their full complexity remained hidden. The corrosion and fragmentation made it impossible to see how the gears fit together or what they were intended to calculate. That began to change with advances in imaging technology. In the 1950s, a physicist named Derek J. de Sola Price examined the fragments. Using photography and mechanical modeling, he realized the device contained multiple interlocking gears. Price suggested that it could model astronomical cycles, but much of his work relied on inference. It wasn't until the late 1970s and early 2000s, when X-ray and later CT scanning became available, that researchers could peer inside the bronze without dismantling it. These scans revealed details that were previously invisible. They showed more than 30 meshing gears arranged on several layers. Each gear had a precise number of teeth. Some teeth were small and closely spaced, others were larger. By counting teeth and measuring diameters, researchers could reconstruct the gear ratios. Why does that matter? Because gear ratios translate motion. If one gear has 12 teeth and it drives a gear with 24, the second turns half as fast. By carefully combining multiple gears, the mechanism could represent cycles that repeat at different rates, like the phases of the moon, the motion of the sun through the zodiac, or the timing of eclipses. The inscriptions on the device provide additional evidence. They describe periods of time and astronomical events, giving context for how the gears should be read. The writing is technical, not poetic. It tells the operator what each dial represents, how to adjust it, and what the markers mean. In short, it is a functional manual carved in bronze. Modern reconstructions, built using the X-ray data, show that the mechanism could predict the timing of solar and lunar eclipses years in advance. It could track the irregular orbit of the moon and even model the positions of the 5 planets visible to the naked eye. These reconstructions match the physical fragments closely, which gives confidence in the conclusions. Institutional teams from the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, the University of Athens, and universities abroad, including Bristol and Cardiff, have all examined these reconstructions. Their work converges on the same conclusion. The mechanism is a highly precise astronomical calculator. What is striking is how this conclusion is based on observable facts. The gears can be counted. Their rotations can be tested. The inscriptions can be read. The physical structure constrains the interpretations. Unlike many ancient artifacts, this one allows predictions and verification. It isn't guesswork. At this point, it is fair to say that the Antikythera mechanism was designed to model predictable celestial cycles mechanically. The combination of gears and inscriptions shows intentionality, skill, and knowledge of astronomical periods. That is what the evidence, stripped of speculation, can tell us. The remaining questions about who built it, how widely this knowledge was shared, or why similar devices aren't more common, come later. But for now, the important fact is simple and grounded. This was a functional device, carefully engineered to represent and track movements in the heavens. By this point, we know what the Antikythera mechanism physically is and what the evidence shows. Now it's time to look at the different ways scholars and enthusiasts have interpreted it. As we talked about, most researchers agree that the mechanism was designed to model celestial cycles. That's clear from the gear ratios, the inscriptions, and modern reconstructions. It functions as an astronomical calculator, a tool for tracking the moon, the sun, eclipses, and possibly the visible planets. It may also have been used in teaching to demonstrate the relationships between different astronomical cycles. That part is widely accepted. However, there are limits to what we can reconstruct. Only about a third of the device survives. Some gears are missing, broken, or so corroded that their function is uncertain. We can make educated guesses about these parts based on the surviving pieces and the cycles they were meant to track, but there is no way to verify every detail. That means reconstructions, while impressive, are always provisional. They demonstrate plausible function, not certainty. Beyond the mainstream view, several more dramatic claims have circulated. Some call the device an ancient computer, suggesting it represents technology far beyond what we normally expect from the ancient world. This narrative frames the device as a step ahead of its time, almost predicting the modern era of digital machines. Others propose it comes from a lost advanced civilization, implying that the Greeks simply inherited something they could not have invented themselves. To evaluate these claims, we need to define our terms carefully. A computer, in the modern sense, is a device capable of general-purpose computation, following programmable instructions and able to process arbitrary data. The Antikythera mechanism does not meet this definition. It is highly specialized. It calculates specific astronomical cycles according to fixed relationships. It does not process general information or allow flexible programming. Calling it a computer stretches the term beyond its practical meaning. Similarly, the idea of a lost advanced civilization is not supported by material evidence. There is no known lineage of similar devices from which it could have been copied, no workshops producing precision gears in the centuries before or after, and no corroborating artifacts to suggest a broader technological context. The craftsmanship is sophisticated, yes, but it fits within the capabilities of Hellenistic engineering, which we see elsewhere in water clocks, automata, and other mechanical devices. In other words, the extraordinary function of the mechanism, the fact that it could track multiple celestial cycles with precision, does not require an extraordinary origin. It does not imply aliens, unknown civilizations, or hidden knowledge. Instead, it reflects careful observation, skilled design, and advanced craftsmanship within the context of the ancient Greek world. Another way to look at it is this. The mechanism is remarkable because it survived, because it is complex, and because it demonstrates knowledge that was otherwise largely theoretical. But it is not inexplicable. By comparing the physical fragments, the inscriptions, and the modern reconstructions, we can see how it was designed to work and how a society with access to geometry, astronomy, and skilled metalworking could have produced it. The takeaway here is subtle but important. When evaluating claims about the mechanism, it helps to keep one standard. Does the evidence support the interpretation, and does it fit the historical context? Using that lens, mainstream interpretations explain the observable function fully. Fringe claims, while intriguing, fail on multiple counts. They either misapply terminology, ignore the material record, or assume a context for which no evidence exists. So while the Antikythera mechanism is undoubtedly extraordinary in what it can do, that does not mean it must come from an extraordinary origin. Its sophistication is a testament to human ingenuity, careful observation, and mechanical skill. It is complex, yes, but entirely understandable within the world that produced it. Even with all the research, imaging, and reconstruction, some questions about the Antikythera mechanism remain unanswered. One of the first is who commissioned it. We don't have a name, a workshop, or a patron recorded anywhere. The inscriptions tell us how it was meant to be used, but not who ordered it built. Was it made for a wealthy individual, a school, or a public institution? The evidence does not provide an answer. Another question is how common such devices were. Only one mechanism has survived, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was unique. Other similar devices might have existed, but they have been lost to time, recycled for their bronze, or destroyed. The lack of surviving examples makes it difficult to know whether the Antikythera mechanism was a rare curiosity or part of a broader tradition of mechanical calculators. We also have to consider why this knowledge did not persist. Ancient Greek and Hellenistic science was highly advanced in some areas, yet complex mechanical technology like this seems to disappear from the record after the 1st century BC. There is no evidence of widespread manufacture, no workshop remains, and no text describing construction methods. It's possible that these devices were too expensive to produce, too specialized to teach widely, or simply lost in the turmoil of the centuries that followed. Finally, there are clear boundaries for what could change our understanding. Finding another device of similar complexity would suggest the Antikythera mechanism was not unique. Discovering texts describing its construction, operation, or purpose would clarify the context and maybe even identify the original maker. Until such evidence appears, however, these questions remain open. Even so, the mystery here is not about how advanced the mechanism was. That is something we can see, measure, and demonstrate. Its sophistication is impressive, but it is not inexplicable. The real puzzle lies in its isolation, how a device so complex could appear, function, and then seemingly vanish, leaving only fragments behind. It is in that isolation rather than its capability that the Antikythera mechanism continues to fascinate us. The second mystery tonight is that of the Voynich Manuscript. It is a complete book, written in an unknown script and filled with unfamiliar illustrations. Its pages follow clear structural rules, yet despite more than a century of focused study, no one has been able to read it with certainty. In 1912, a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich acquired a manuscript that would soon become one of the most famous enigmas in the world of historical scholarship. He found it in the Villa Mondragone near Rome in a collection of old books belonging to the Jesuits. At first glance, it was just another ancient manuscript, parchment, ink, and illustrations, but a closer look revealed something unusual. The text was written in an unknown script, and the illustrations were unlike anything seen in conventional medieval works. The book itself is modest in size, roughly the height of a modern paperback, with around 240 vellum folios. Vellum, a kind of fine treated animal skin, was the standard material for important books in the Middle Ages. Its pages are thick, slightly yellowed with age, and show careful preparation. The ink varies from dark brown to lighter shades, suggesting either different batches or fading over centuries. Across the pages, the mysterious script runs in neat lines, as if written with steady care by a practiced hand. Illustrations cover a wide range of subjects. There are sections depicting plants, many of which do not match any known species. Other pages show astronomical or astrological diagrams, human figures, and even what appear to be biological sketches. Some pages are dominated by dense text, others by elaborate imagery, but all share a meticulous attention to layout. It is clear that whoever created the manuscript intended it to be read, studied, and referenced. Radiocarbon dating of the vellum, conducted in the early 2000s, places the manuscript's creation in the early 15th century, around 1404 to 1438. That date aligns well with the style of the illustrations and the materials used. The results are not precise to a single year, but they are precise enough to rule out many later origin theories. In other words, this is genuinely a medieval object, not a clever modern forgery or a Renaissance pastiche. The manuscript's ownership history is partially traceable before Voynich's acquisition. It passed through various European hands over the centuries, including members of the Holy Roman Empire and certain Italian collectors, although the details are fragmentary. Each transfer, documented or inferred, adds credibility to the manuscript's authenticity and age. The key point is this: the Voynich manuscript's age is not seriously in doubt. Whatever it is, it comes from the early 15th century, long before Voynich discovered it. Its provenance, the physical materials, and the radiocarbon dating all converge on this conclusion. The mystery lies not in when it was made, but in what it contains and why no one has been able to read it since. One of the first things you notice about the Voynich manuscript is the text itself. The script is unlike any other known writing system. It consists of dozens of unique characters, some of which appear in clusters, others repeated across the page. Certain letters appear far more frequently than others, and some combinations show up again and again. This repetition hints at underlying rules, even if the meaning of the text remains a mystery. The lines of text are remarkably consistent. Each page typically contains around 30 lines, all evenly spaced, with words separated by small gaps. The layout suggests careful planning. There are no obvious corrections or smudges that would indicate careless copying. It's as if the scribe had a clear system for how each page should look and followed it meticulously. The spacing and line lengths give the appearance of language that can be read from left to right, following a flow familiar to anyone used to reading books. Interspersed among the text are illustrations, which appear in fairly distinct categories. There are pages showing plants, many of them unidentifiable or fantastical, pages with circular diagrams that resemble astronomical or astrological charts, and pages with human figures, often naked, interacting with what look like pools of water or strange mechanical contraptions. There are also sections that seem anatomical, showing body parts or networks of vessels, sometimes in clusters or repeated patterns. These illustrations, while varied, are consistently paired with the text, suggesting that the images and words were meant to be interpreted together. Once scholars realized the Voynich manuscript was more than just an odd-looking book, they began to study it systematically. One of the first approaches was statistical analysis. By counting how often each character appears, how often sequences repeat, and how words are structured, researchers can measure what is called entropy. In simple terms, entropy is a measure of unpredictability. A high entropy text is very random, while a low entropy text is highly repetitive. The Voynich manuscript falls somewhere in between, which is exactly what we see in natural languages. Letters and words repeat enough to create patterns, but not so much that the text is predictable. Comparisons with known languages reinforce this pattern. Scholars have looked at English, Latin, Arabic, and many others, analyzing character frequency, word length, and other features. The Voynich text shows similar statistical characteristics, short and long words appear, certain letters occur more frequently at the beginning or end of words, and some combinations recur with a rhythm that resembles grammar. These regularities make the manuscript behave in form like a language. Computers have been helpful in this work, but it is important to understand what they can and cannot do. Programs can sort characters, count repetitions, calculate entropy, and test hypotheses about structure. They can suggest which patterns might correspond to grammar or syntax. What they cannot do is reveal meaning if no key or Rosetta Stone exists. Computers can describe the rules the text follows, but they cannot translate it, nor can they determine whether the text conveys ideas or is a sophisticated cipher or even an elaborate hoax. Importantly, the manuscript does not behave like randomness. If someone had filled the pages with arbitrary symbols, the frequency of characters, distribution of word lengths, and pattern repetition would look very different. The consistency in structure shows the scribe followed rules. Yet following rules does not guarantee meaning. It only demonstrates that the text is orderly, deliberate, and patterned. In short, the Voynich Manuscript is a book that behaves like a language in its form, structure, and repetition. The combination of consistent line spacing, recurring character sequences, and systematic pairing with illustrations creates the appearance of readable text. Statistical and computational analysis confirms this mechanical order, even if the content remains opaque. The rules are clear, but the meaning is not. By now, it's clear that the Voynich Manuscript follows rules, that it behaves like a language, and that it has been carefully constructed. The next question is, what do these patterns actually mean? Scholars have approached the problem in several ways, and it helps to examine each hypothesis with the same standards: observable evidence, internal consistency, and historical context. Among mainstream ideas, the first is that the manuscript is a cipher. In this view, each character or combination of characters represents letters or syllables of a real language deliberately encoded to hide the content. This could explain why the text resists reading while still showing the statistical patterns of language. Some cryptographers have attempted substitutions and algorithms to decode it, but no method has produced a convincing, consistent translation across the manuscript. The cipher hypothesis is plausible, but the lack of a key keeps it speculative. Another explanation is that the manuscript represents a constructed language, a deliberately invented system for communication. In this scenario, the author could have designed the script and grammar from scratch, with or without practical use in mind. This would account for the regularity and structured appearance of the text. Like a cipher, it aligns with the mechanical order we observe, but it cannot be confirmed without a Rosetta Stone or parallel text. A third mainstream hypothesis is that the manuscript encodes natural language text, using a known language in a complex, rule-based way. This could involve abbreviations, ligatures, or a phonetic system unfamiliar to modern scholars. In principle, such a system could be decoded with enough effort, but attempts so far have not produced a solution that works consistently across the manuscript. Beyond these academically grounded ideas, more dramatic claims exist. Some suggest the manuscript is an elaborate hoax designed to appear meaningful without conveying any information. Others propose it encodes a lost universal language, a sort of secret knowledge accessible only to an enlightened few. Both of these claims are inherently difficult to evaluate because they are not anchored in observable, testable evidence. They sound elegant, even seductive, but they cannot be confirmed through analysis. One of the more recent and discussed ideas is a claim that the Voynich text might represent a form of Old Turkish, with the script reflecting phonemic orthography, meaning the characters could correspond to spoken sounds rather than a direct alphabet of a known language. A Turkish-Canadian engineer and collaborators suggested that patterns of roots, prefixes, and suffixes in the characters resemble structures in Turkic languages, and that some words could be aligned with plant names or seasonal terms when interpreted this way. Their work even claimed partial translation of vocabulary on roughly 30% of the pages. However, this theory has not been accepted by mainstream linguists, and submissions to academic journals were rejected or remain inconclusive. No consistent, reproducible decoding across the entire manuscript has been demonstrated. The Old Turkish theory illustrates the challenges of evaluating hypotheses about the manuscript. While it proposes a structured reading and claims partial word-level translations, it falls short on repeatability and predictive power. No method has been shown to work consistently across all pages, and results cannot be independently verified. This example reinforces the principle that a claim must be testable to be credible. Elegant as it may sound, the hypothesis remains speculative until it meets the same standards of verification applied to more conventional interpretations. Mainstream hypotheses at least provide a framework for systematic investigation, even if the ultimate solution remains unknown. The key takeaway is clear. A claim that cannot be tested cannot be confirmed, no matter how elegant it sounds. The manuscript may contain hidden messages, invented language, or a sophisticated cipher, but until evidence allows repeatable verification, the work of scholars remains grounded in observable patterns and disciplined analysis. In other words, speculation can be interesting, but it does not replace evidence. The manuscript structure invites interpretation, but interpretations must be testable to be credible. Even after centuries of study, some of the most basic questions about the Voynich manuscript remain unanswered. We do not know why it was created. Its purpose is unclear. Was it a medical or herbal reference? An astrological guide? A textbook for a secret school? Or was it simply a compendium of fanciful illustrations with invented text? No surviving documents tell us, and the manuscript itself offers no explanation. The author is equally mysterious. There is no signature, no marginal note, no reference in contemporary records. Whoever produced the manuscript was clearly literate and skilled in the conventions of manuscript production, yet their identity, training, and cultural context remain unknown. The handwriting, style of illustration, and materials only give hints about when and roughly where it was made, not who made it. the manuscript's resistance to translation is partly due to the way it is written. The script is consistent and ordered, but we lack a key. There is no Rosetta Stone to connect its characters to a known language, and statistical patterns alone cannot reveal semantic content. Attempts to assign phonetic or symbolic values work only in fragments, and no hypothesis has yet unlocked a coherent, full-text reading. Even when statistical analysis or computer modeling identifies patterns, the leap to meaning remains unbridged. The essential fact is this: the mystery of the Voynich Manuscript does not survive because scholars haven't tried hard enough. It survives because the evidence stops where it stops. We have the book, we can study it, and we can describe its structure in extraordinary detail, but the text itself remains silent. Its secrets are bounded by the parchment, the ink, and the system that produced it, and until new evidence appears, those boundaries define the limits of what we can know. Our final mystery tonight is a monument so familiar it's easy to forget how much of it was once hidden. Carved directly from the limestone of the Giza Plateau, the Sphinx has been buried, uncovered, repaired, and reinterpreted many times. What survives is not just a statue, but a long record of how evidence, context, and assumption shape what we think we know. The Great Sphinx of Giza is an imposing limestone statue stretching about 73 meters long and standing 20 meters high. Its body is that of a reclining lion, powerful and grounded, while its head bears the features of a human, wearing the royal headdress of ancient Egyptian pharaohs. This combination of human intellect and animal strength is characteristic of the Sphinx as a mythical creature intended to symbolize guardianship and authority. Lions were associated with kingship and protection, and by placing a human face atop a lion's body, the builders created a figure that could embody both wisdom and power. For centuries, the Sphinx was buried up to its shoulders in sand, leaving only the head and upper chest visible. Its full scale was hidden, and its body's length and detail largely lost to view. The wind and drifting dunes shaped not only its physical state, but also the way people perceived it. With most of the statue concealed, early visitors often imagined it differently than we do today, sometimes seeing it as smaller, more symbolic, or even fantastical. One feature that immediately drew attention is the missing nose. Early visitors and sketches from the 18th and 19th centuries show that the face was already damaged, with the nose completely gone. Its absence sparked all kinds of speculation. Some claimed it was deliberately destroyed in antiquity, perhaps for religious or political reasons, while others suggested natural erosion or accident. Regardless of how it happened, the missing nose dramatically alters the statue's expression and has become one of the most recognizable aspects of the Sphinx today. Early excavations began in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. European travelers and explorers, motivated by curiosity and the new field of Egyptology, started to dig away the sand, revealing more of the statue over time. These efforts were uneven and often rudimentary. Sometimes they exposed the body only to have sand drift back in, covering it again. What they did manage to uncover, however, was enough to spark fascination and speculation about its origins, purpose, and age. The first modern descriptions recorded the Sphinx in meticulous detail. Travelers noted the enormous scale, the weathered face, and the missing nose. Sketches and early engravings helped scholars across Europe visualize the monument, even if they had never seen it themselves. These accounts often emphasized its grandeur and mystery, sometimes comparing it to mythic or legendary statues from other cultures. Immediate assumptions followed naturally from these early impressions. Because the Sphinx was so large and ancient-looking, many early observers attributed it to an almost mythic past. Some suggested it was the work of a lost civilization, others linked it to biblical or classical narratives. Few questioned the scale or timing within Egyptian history, and many interpretations were shaped as much by imagination as by evidence. The essential point is this: the Sphinx we know today is partly a product of modern rediscovery. Its prominence, scale, and even the narrative of mystery surrounding it are shaped by the sands being cleared, the sketches being made, and the first modern scholars deciding what to emphasize. The monument itself is ancient, but our understanding of it and the story we tell begins with the act of finding it again. The Great Sphinx is carved directly from the natural limestone bedrock of the Giza Plateau, which consists of multiple layers formed over millions of years. The lower layers are harder, denser limestone, while the upper layers are softer and more porous. This variation affects how different parts of the statue have weathered over time, with the body showing deeper erosion and the head often in better condition despite its exposure. By examining these layers, geologists and archaeologists can read the monument almost like a historical record written in stone. Weathering patterns on the Sphinx are uneven but revealing. The body, which is mostly buried in sand for much of its history, shows pitting, flaking, and rounded erosion that reflects both wind and occasional water exposure. The head and the headdress, more exposed to sun and wind, display a different pattern of erosion, shallower, smoother, and less fractured. These contrasts offer clues not only about the monument's construction, but also about the environment over thousands of years, helping researchers differentiate between natural degradation and later human activity. The limestone itself was quarried directly from the plateau. Blocks removed to carve the Sphinx were likely used in nearby temples, causeways, and other structures, linking the monument to the broader construction projects of the Old Kingdom. Archaeologists can match tool marks and extraction techniques on the Sphinx with nearby quarry sites, revealing how the builders approached this enormous task. Simple chisels and dolerite pounding stones were used to shape the stone, leaving distinctive grooves and indentations that still survive today. These marks tell us not only how the statue was carved, but also the methods, labor, and skill involved. Reading the stone carefully allows us to reconstruct a timeline. The sequence of limestone layers, patterns of erosion, and evidence of tool use all combine to preserve a record of creation and change. The statue itself becomes a document recording both the hands that shaped it and the centuries that followed. By studying the material closely, researchers can anchor the Sphinx in its geological and historical context, bridging the gap between natural processes and human craftsmanship. The stone of the Sphinx preserves a timeline if we know how to read it. Its layers, weathering, and tool marks are not just physical features, they are evidence offering insight into the monument's construction, environment, and history over millennia. The Sphinx sits at the heart of the Giza Plateau, surrounded by a complex of monuments that anchor it firmly in the Old Kingdom period of ancient Egypt. Nearby lie the three main pyramids, mastabas, and smaller tombs, forming a vast necropolis for kings, nobles, and high officials. The Sphinx itself is carved directly from the bedrock, integrating it into the plateau in a way that suggests deliberate planning within this monumental landscape. Its position aligns with key points on the horizon and with other structures, hinting at its ceremonial and symbolic role rather than a purely decorative function. One of the most important features of the surrounding site is the Sphinx's causeway. This long, straight avenue connects the statue to a nearby valley temple, part of a network that would have guided processions, offerings, and ritual activities. The temple and causeway are aligned with the Sphinx, and their construction techniques, masonry styles, and proportions are consistent with other Old Kingdom architecture. These relationships allow archaeologists to place the Sphinx in time and context, giving clues to its function and the people who built it. Dating by association is a key method in understanding the Sphinx. Because direct inscriptions or records of its construction are scarce, researchers look at nearby monuments, construction materials, and stylistic parallels. The Sphinx shares quarry marks, erosion patterns, and alignment with Old Kingdom pyramids, particularly those built for Pharaoh Khafre, which strongly suggests a contemporary origin. Even the Valley Temple shows similar carving techniques and mortar use, reinforcing the idea that the Sphinx was not an isolated project, but part of a larger architectural program. Other minor structures, subsidiary statues, and remnants of causeways form a broader context that underscores the Sphinx's integration into religious, funerary, and ceremonial life. It was part of a carefully planned landscape designed to impress and to convey the authority and divine connection of the pharaohs. Its surrounding architecture anchors it in a real historical moment rather than in the timeless or mythic past imagined by early visitors. The essential point is that the Great Sphinx of Giza is not an isolated monument. It is embedded in a network of Old Kingdom architecture, causeways, and temples, and its scale, placement, and craftsmanship make sense only in relation to its surroundings. Understanding it in context allows us to see it as a product of its time, purposefully designed and integrated into the broader ceremonial landscape of ancient Egypt. Most scholars date the Sphinx to the reign of Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BC based on its alignment with pyramids, the style of nearby temples, and quarry marks that match construction techniques of the Old Kingdom. This mainstream interpretation places the statue firmly within a known historical and architectural context, linking it to the broader ceremonial landscape of Giza. One alternative idea is the water erosion hypothesis. Proponents argue that the deep vertical weathering patterns on the Sphinx's body could have been caused by prolonged exposure to rainfall, suggesting the monument is much older than conventionally thought, perhaps predating the Old Kingdom by thousands of years. The argument is based on the observation that typical wind erosion produces shallower horizontal patterns, whereas some sections of the Sphinx show rounded vertical channels, which resemble damage caused by heavy rain over long periods. Evaluating this hypothesis requires looking at climate data and the broader archaeological context. Geological studies show that the Sahara was wetter during certain prehistoric periods, but the timing does not align neatly with the Old Kingdom. Furthermore, the surrounding pyramids, causeways, and temples all match Khafra's era with consistent masonry and quarrying techniques. If the Sphinx were thousands of years older, it would be difficult to explain why it sits in a perfectly aligned position relative to monuments built millennia later. Climate evidence also indicates that while some rainfall may have contributed to surface weathering, the majority of erosion can be accounted for by wind, sand, and occasional human activity. Other fringe claims suggest radically different dates or even lost civilizations, but these ideas generally fail to integrate with the surrounding evidence. They often rely on isolated observations of erosion or stylistic features while ignoring the coherent archaeological landscape, pyramids, temples, and causeways that are all clearly Old Kingdom constructions. A single anomaly does not outweigh the consistency of this broader context. The takeaway here is that the Sphinx's age and purpose are best understood in relation to the monuments around it. While some erosion patterns are unusual and spark debate, they do not overturn the alignment, masonry, and historical evidence pointing to Khafra's reign. A single anomaly cannot outweigh a coherent archaeological landscape, and any interpretation must be judged against the full body of evidence, not just one intriguing feature. Despite centuries of study, some aspects of the Great Sphinx remain uncertain. One question is the original face. The statue's features are heavily weathered, and the nose and beard are missing, leaving scholars to reconstruct its appearance largely from the remaining contours, early sketches, and fragments found nearby. While the face is generally believed to represent Pharaoh Khafra, subtle details of expression, proportion, and artistic style remain open to interpretation. The original symbolism of the Sphinx is also debated. We know it combines a human head with a lion's body, but why this specific combination was chosen is less clear. It may have embodied protection, royal authority, or a divine connection, but without contemporary inscriptions, any interpretation rests on context and analogy rather than direct evidence. The Sphinx has undergone repeated restorations over the centuries. From ancient repairs using limestone blocks to modern interventions to stabilize the statue and prevent erosion, these efforts have preserved its form but also altered the surface. Some features we see today may not fully match the original intent, which complicates our understanding of the statue's design and meaning. The essential point is this: the Sphinx's mystery is one of intention, not age. Its scale, placement, and construction date are reasonably well established. What remains uncertain is why it was designed the way it was, what subtle messages it was meant to convey, and how viewers of its own time would have understood it. The questions we ask today are guided by interpretation, context, and surviving evidence, rather than by speculation about an unknowable past. We have come to the end of our journey through these mysteries. Perhaps you are already asleep, my voice a faint echo in your dreams. Or perhaps you are still awake, ready for another story from my library. Thank you for spending this time here. I hope I'll see you again soon. Until then, good night.